The Brooklyn Nets have kept the NBA waiting for more than a year because of the absence of their two superstars. But finally this season, we are bound to see how a Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving tandem would perform in the Nets team, which is already loaded with talent. While in reality, their two superstars have had some of the longest layoffs in the NBA during the past few years. But despite Kevin Durant coming off one of the worst injuries in sports, and despite Kyrie Irving having his usual clashes with the media, believe it or not, the general consensus should be that they will still be able to lead this Nets team to at least a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. While as always, a pairing of two superstar players who don't necessarily have the best history with star teammates would always be problematic in the eyes of fans. But at least on a basketball standpoint, I think Kyrie and KD should easily make the Nets one of the best teams in the league, with or without a third star to play with them. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which we'll talk about in this video. So what's good guys, it's Balls here, and in this video, we'll take a look at what's in store for this new look Brooklyn Nets team and why they can easily win the 2021 NBA Championship. Let's get to it. If we're going to talk about the Nets, first we have to talk about Kevin Durant. Well, it may be hard to forecast how he might have been affected by his Achilles injury because honestly, it's hard to find a comparable player in terms of talent level and age who can be put alongside KD in terms of this type of injury. But still, I think Durant should be fine overall. Well, assuming he loses some of his explosiveness, it's still very logical to conclude that he would still be able to put up at least the same offensive numbers, considering that he's more of a finesse and skill type of player. Just by looking at the success of his past teams, it's easy to figure out that having KD on your team as a first option will just outright bring success. During Durant's past 10 seasons, his team has finished either as the best or the second best team in terms of offensive efficiency a total of 5 times, spanning both his years with OKC and with Golden State. And when you add one of the best scoring guards in Kyrie Irving to the equation, then you're almost guaranteed a top 3 offensive team with these two running your team. Because in reality, KD and Kyrie are two of the best talents in the entire NBA in terms of combining volume and efficiency. When you look at all the active players' true shooting percentage in contrast to their usage rate, KD ranks 3rd in the NBA only behind Karl Anthony Towns and Stephen Curry, while Kyrie ranks 11th overall behind guys like LeBron, Giannis, and James Harden. Last season, the Nets ranked 22nd in terms of offensive efficiency in the NBA, but now that they have two high-volume, high-efficiency stars, I think this team is just bound to blow out a lot of teams night in and night out. Even without these two guys, the Nets already have talented scorers like Spencer Dinwiddie and Caris Levert, but their scoring should come more efficiently this season now that they don't really have to carry the burden on the offensive end. While last season, both Dinwiddie and Levert finished in the top 20 in the NBA in terms of usage rate simply because someone has to create shots for the Nets, and they did a pretty good job being the main options for this team. Just imagine how they would be able to dominate bench units when they become the 3rd and 4th options in Brooklyn. Well, the problem with the Nets last season was that their offense seemed to falter when both Dinwiddie and Kyrie weren't on the floor. Their offensive production per 100 possessions dropped significantly to the point that their numbers were even below the Warriors. But now with KD and Kyrie being the team's main offensive initiators, Brooklyn's bench should look more solid, and I think that depth is really going to be important for them this year. With their two stars coming from long layoffs and with a more compressed season with a lot of back-to-back games, this team might have to rely on new additions like Landry Shamet or Jeff Green more than expected. But if their key players all stay healthy, it's quite easy to imagine this Nets team having a consistent 12-man deep rotation. And Coach Steve Nash will definitely have a lot of chances to display his coaching creativity with him having tons of talented guys surrounding his two superstars. Well, honestly, with all the pieces that Brooklyn has right now, I think that whoever holds the ball in every possession will easily have space to operate with tons of support around. Because even in those instances that KD and Kyrie aren't holding the ball, they should easily be effective as catch and shoot guys. That's just how talented both these guys are. During the last 4 seasons, KD is connected in 44.4% of his catch and shoot 3-point attempts, and that's good for 5th place in the NBA. And Kyrie Irving isn't that far off at 7th place as he has hit 44.3% of his spot-up threes. And if that's not good enough, Joe Harris also shoots 44%, while guys like Shamet and Taurean are just a few spots below him at 40% and 39% respectively. And so, these numbers prove that the Nets can be as creative as they want in experimenting with 5-man lineups, and they would still be able to shoot the lights out more often than not. That's just how dangerous this team could be on the offensive end. And I think playing KD at the 5 wouldn't be a problem for them either. In today's NBA, teams who can space the floor are able to dominate the opposition. So just imagine Kevin Durant as a center together with 4 other shooters on the floor. Such a lineup would be virtually unguardable. But what if the Nets decide to trade for a third star in the near future? Could a team headlined by KD and Kyrie really coexist and work with a third star? Well, I'm not saying that they're going to trade for James Harden, but let's put him as an example here just to look at the most extreme scenario possible. While among all active players, KD ranks 2nd, Harden ranks 3rd, and Irving ranks 9th in career points per game average. And in a team with those 3 players together, it's easy to use the same "there's only one ball" narrative. While it's easy to think that KD is a ball-dominant player, but based on the statistics, he isn't actually someone who hugs the ball most of the time. In fact, during the 2018 to 2019 season, he registered his highest rank in terms of possession time for his entire career, and he ranked only 46th in the entire NBA, even though that was his most ball-dominant season. And Kyrie Irving only ran an average of 3 to 4 isolation plays per game during the last 2 seasons, which aren't really numbers of a ball-dominant point guard. Well, assuming they'll have Harden in the team, then he would be the sole real ball-dominant player on the Nets, because there's just no other guy who ran more isolation plays in their careers more than Harden. But just imagine him dribbling the ball from the top of the key with 2 excellent catch-and-shoot players like KD and Kyrie waiting on the wing to shoot or to cut to the basket. And by the way, last season, the Brooklyn Nets took 90 shots per game on average. During the past 3 seasons, KD, Kyrie, and Harden averaged a combined 57 shots per game. And assuming that they took 20 shots each per game as teammates, then the rest of their team will still have 30 shots remaining or even more, depending on how fast of a team they'll be. And so, I just think that in the Brooklyn Nets case, adding a third star even in the mold of James Harden wouldn't really be a problem. I think that in a team with KD and Kyrie, having too much star power isn't going to be much of an issue. And that's because they are 2 of the most efficient offensive players in the NBA who can also play off the ball. And in reality, they are just that dominant on the offensive end simply because of their talent and not because they need to have the ball in their hands a huge chunk of the time. KD has proven that he can coexist with 2 other high-volume scorers in Golden State and even win a title. And based on the numbers, Kyrie can play his share of offense without dominating the ball if it chooses to. But looking at this current Nets roster as it is, I think you can compare them to the LA Clippers. While both teams have a primary MVP level talent as their main star together with a talented second option. Plus both teams feature a deep bench with lots of talent. And despite them having chemistry problems, the Clippers were still the 2nd best offensive team in the league. And it's not hard to imagine the Nets being better than them on that end. But the thing is, it's easier to give the Clippers a pass when their shots aren't falling because they can somehow manage to offset it with their defense. But it's hard to say the same for the Nets at this point. But still, Brooklyn has some solid defenders with guys like Bruce Brown who posted above average defensive numbers last season for Detroit. And there's also Taurean Prince, who is a very promising 3-and-D option provided it is able to leave his shooting troubles behind. But if there's any positive thing to make out of the roster, it's that they're just too talented offensively. And it's safe to assume that even if they don't finish as a top 15 defensive team this season, they can still outscore opponents on any given night. While I think a 5-man lineup of KD, Kyrie, Dinwiddie, Harris, and Levert would be super fun to watch, but I don't think that they would be sustainable, especially in the playoffs. I think they have to put at least one legit big man who can alter shots and protect the rim, and I don't think DeAndre Jordan is going to cut it at this point in his career. If they're going to go head-to-head with teams like the Celtics, Heat, or the Raptors, I think they have to at least put in a mobile big man like Jarrett Allen who can somehow contest the shots of quicker players coming off the pick and roll. I think inserting Allen at the 5 will at least produce an average defense that would enable the Nets to compete in a 7-game series. And if you're a Nets fan, it's nice to have a team that is comparable to the Clippers, but I think you'd rather have better chemistry than what they have in LA. Well, I think the key here is Kyrie Irving accepting a much more reduced role now that he's playing with Kevin Durant. And assuming that he's learned his lesson from his Boston days, then they should be fine at least on a team leadership standpoint. And also, guys like Levert and Dinwiddie should be able to quickly adjust into their new roles as the 3rd and 4th options after being the team's main attractions last season. And if everything falls into place, and if KD comes back at least 80% of his old self, then it's not hard to see the Brooklyn Nets competing for the top seed in the East right away. But I think if KD comes back at 100% or even better, then I think the whole NBA will be in trouble, and it just might be a matter of time before KD and Kyrie wins another NBA championship. Thank you guys for sticking until the end of the video, and feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please smash the like button because it helps the channel a lot to be noticed by other fans around the NBA YouTube community. And please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, because you don't want to miss another fire NBA content which I put out regularly. So again, this is Rira Balls, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace!